Hello and welcome to Pride Inside via Amnesty International. It's amazing to see you all here. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Before I begin, I want to introduce someone very special to you who's going to be sign language interpreting this talk/workshop. Please welcome Max to the screen. I'm giving lots of cheering sounds here, lots of emojis. My name is Joelle Taylor and I'm a poet, author, and playwright. I'm also the editor from next year of Outspoken Press, where I'm going to be elevating marginalized women's voices, including LGBTQ voices. I have a background that is within spoken word. Spoken word is a kind of poetry where you take the poetry straight to the people, where you look your editor in the eye. So that's my background. I founded the National Youth Slams of the UK in 2001 and ran it for 18 years via the Poetry Society. And I've also just written a programme that's gone out on Radio 4 called Butch. And it's kind of around that show we're going to be talking today. So, putting my little spectacles on, I will begin. Today's session is all about writing your own identity, which is essentially about creating and owning queer narratives. And so I'll begin with a little bit of a story. I've just told you that the programme Butch I contributed to is still on the BBC. Now you can download it for the next year. But that show was written around my new show called Butterfly Fist. In 2018, I was commissioned by the spoken word and poetry organisation Apples and Snakes to write a 15-minute spoken word piece that would become part of their huge happening, a multidisciplinary artist experience at Battersea Arts Centre, and that was called Rallying Cry. The brief was around writing the idea of protest. I was on tour in Australia at the time, writing the resulting piece, and I was touring this book called Songs My Enemy Taught Me. Songs My Enemy Taught Me is a collection of poetry which is written around the theme of women's experiences, both cis and trans, globally. And part of the story of that book was the experiences of lesbian women. So when the commission came, I wrote into that moment. I wrote into the uncertain rage I felt at the rewriting of some lesbian history, and even more about those huge blank pages in history where my story, my narrative should have been. I felt a new silence rising, but I also felt grief, both for myself and for the lesbian community I wrote about in Butterfly Fist. I wanted to write specifically about the body as a site of protest, a fairly common theme for lesbians and feminists throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. But this body was masculine feminine, a butch body. Butches are amongst the most maligned, misrepresented and murdered of all the LGBTQ plus identities. They're so disliked by both the heterosexual and cis and queer people that they've gradually been erased in some ways from history. So I wanted to write Butterfly Fist to remind my people of the central role that butches have played within our global communities for centuries. Butches are the visible face of lesbianism in the same way that effeminate gay men are the visible face of homosexuality. Butches take the brunt of hatred from the wider community, and they're often targets of male violence and violent language, even from within our own LGBTQ plus community. It's everybody knows that the LGBTQ community at the moment is divided in some ways, and I wanted to write something that would remind people of all of our connections. And the way I think about it is, there is a stained glass window, and it is beautiful. It's made up of purple and red and orange and blue and green and yellow, and all these different colours are vibrant and shining and have purpose, and the light shines through them perfectly. But the yellow is arguing with the purple, who's got beef with green, who doesn't agree with pink. And all the while, while these different colours are arguing, not one of us noticed the silhouette of the guy approaching with a stone in his hand. And that was the central image I wanted to take for Butterfly Fist, to remind us all of our connectivity, how we are one gorgeous and beautiful community, but also to be able to talk about the things that divide us a little bit in a sense of safety. Butterfly Fist was set in a boxing ring, roped in barbed wire. In one corner was a three-piece suit, which was hanging from a steamer, so there was lots of smog and steam coming up. And in the other corner was me, dressed only in a pair of tight white boxer shorts and a white vest. Throughout the piece, I slowly get dressed. And I'm going to read to you a few passages from Butterfly Fist now. And I believe they'll be coming up on screen as I read. Some girls fall from sunlit skies, straight down into flat pack floral dresses, grab their smiles from a hook behind the door, rescue their faces from riptides of mirrors. Some girls are always falling. Round 1. You fall and miss your body entirely. Land somewhere in enemy territory, behind the lines. Your body, a foreign country you cannot get a visa for. Your skin, a parachute caught in tree branches. You awaken in no man's land. Gunfire from over the horizon, and women are crucified from hashtags across the dark hills. Your trench is crowded with dead women wearing faces that try to escape them and the clothes of someone you once knew. There are landmines buried deep beneath your skin. No one understands them. In between the battleground and the bedroom is this sticky quiet, this no man's land. And this is where you live. Men explode when you least expect it. You will spend a lifetime searching for your body. Round 2. The body as protest. You are born, broad-backed and wide-skinned, rolling cigarettes and shirt sleeves, skyline chin, Levi 501s curled up to cuff, lip the same, white t-shirts so they may project themselves on you, tsunami quiff, and black boots whose roots spread and tangle through the center of the earth. You don't wear makeup to prove you have not made anything up. This is your face. Your father's friends gave it to you one Christmas Eve, 1973. You unwrapped it beneath a decorated tree from which the rest of your family hung. They sipped cocktails as you slowly disappeared, swaying gently to that wail of celebration, that harbinger of party. You cut your first suit from the thick silence when you enter a room. They call you Butch. The name derived from Butch Cassidy, true story. You are the descendant of outlaws. You are irony incarnate, woman butchered, cut into select meats. Middle distance stare, breast, shoulder, wild tongue. They fear you. Boy, dyke, diesel female sodomite, lady faggot, bull dyke, bull dagger, queer pervert, gold star silverback stud invert, kiki shemale drag drope, baby butch tomboy, stone. But if you are a stone, you are a chip off the mountain, and you join an avalanche of wrong walking women, shaven heads like tumbling rocks. You keep them close, they are rosary. On the dance floor, we are tidal, heckle the night, passing nods between us and handshakes that stop our hands shaking. We are untamed, a wilderness of women. We are waste ground. What a waste, love. Nothing grows on us, barren and sterile and unuseful female, empty as church pews. The wind rattles its fist inside our wounds. Come on then, snake boy. Come now, heretic healer. Where are the maths that solve us? How do we fit into your algebra, your binary code? Our bodies are political placards. And we dance as demonstration that you do not own us. It's revolution in the living room, uprising in the public toilets, insurgency in the suburbs. Fear us. I told you, fear us. Not camp enough to be your best friend. The closet is filled with clothes that we refuse to wear. Not funny enough for your talk show, bruv. A woman without makeup is a woman without a face. Who knew that when we were cleansing, we were erasing our whole existence? Round 3. The body as land you are trespassing on. Dyke. You are a trespasser in your own body. The landowners are men who walk past you in the street. In Accrington, cars slow and words ejaculate from half-open windows. Your mother's phone rings in the early hours. Do you know about your daughter? I think you ought to know about your daughter. 3 Pentecosts with Nazi insignia break into your home. God is an atheist who no longer believes in himself. They unscrew the light bulb slowly, eyes fixed on this unmade-up girl, trembling defiance on the cigarette box settee, and whisper a prayer for you to leave your family. You do. You are 13 when a man pulls you over the back seat of a bus and stubs his kiss out on your cheek. Slowly, a boxer's embrace. But he doesn't throw the punch. He posts it. You wait by letterboxes, flinch when it chatters, never answer the phone. In Brixton, men hold their fish like babies and watch as you walk past as though they are thin-ribbed cats in the undergrowth and you, a small, shaven-headed bird. There's a reason that women are compared to birds, and it's got nothing to do with wings. Some songs harden on the wind. Some girls are kept in ornamental cages on suburban mantelpieces. You are 18, out clubbing with the crew, a baby butch in the abattoir of beauty, the quiver and the frantic, white girls with bindis, white boys with dreadlocks, saris and docks, tribal tattoos. We are the modern primitives, wearing our heritage like white flags, like cowardice. And you dance as though you are stamping out fires, as though your boots are hammering in the last nails to the old gods. Strangers hug and tell each other secrets. You are ecstatic. But then the light looks away as you are separated by the flock. I lost my place. And skinny wolves separate you from the flock. The drugs no longer working as they amber eye you. Aberration, and they must conquer what they cannot name. 23. When you finished rehearsals in the city with nowhere to sleep, and you wish the posh geese good night, and you walk and you walk and you walk and you walk, and he finds you quickly, and your first class degree won't save you, and when you come round you are empty and his eyes are full and above you twin gods. This is the first time you think you're going to be killed, and when you're not, it's a disappointment. The morning after pill is a communion wafer, and you are forgiven your trespasses. You learn quickly. Men are broken things, breaking things. Round 5. Each night we have a lock-in and meet at the back of my heart, smoking in circles, passing grins between us like pass the parcel, opening each layer of the smile until the pith is revealed. We are ferocious children. We are ferocious women, eating our children, our youth, climbing out of our skins and leaving them draped behind us like soiled wedding dresses as we fall into each other's mouths. This is love, furious love. We die slowly, cigarettes stubbed against obsidian skies. Our brain explodes into night butterflies. A car loses its grip on reality, suicides by the bouquet full. Not one of my friends was allowed to live in her body unaccompanied. Always a landlord, always a lodger. Round 6. In sleep, my body is a haunted house. There are footsteps along fallopian corridors. The corridor is a rope strung across a mouth. I have been haunted, awoken by blurred voices without bodies, quiet arguments in my basement. Once I was possessed by a small girl who looked the same as me, who self-murdered on a Sunday afternoon while her parents were downstairs, hard-wiring their hangovers, and Christmas tunes played in nooses. My heart is a church bell, but nobody visits, and God is a man with his hands in his pockets, watching. Round 6. Oh, you bayonet boys, you truncheon rub. My face doesn't fit my face, but your fist does. Years from now, no one will remember how we fought, how each bruised knuckle was a white boy's head bent in prayer. No one will remember the love, how alike it is to rage, how screams made corporeal are rainbows, or how rainbows became corporate logos, or how we carved our epitaphs into a stone wall. No one will remember unpicking acronyms by candlelight, so I'll be in the back bar of heaven. Cass will be getting around him and releasing that laugh, wild birds escaping her mouth. None of this will matter. I'll be stretching the skins with Sam Sylvan. How did we ever get so old, friend, so silver-backed? I'll be riding the ghost roads with Avi, bareback and knee clench on a Harley. I'll be scuffing the city with Doodzilly. Men will stare like open shaft mines. I'll be walking the white lines with Tony. Tight mouth, antelope, heart. I can't remember the names of all my dead friends. but they're here now. Our grief, a leather jacket, our laughter, static, as we fade to a sepia, the colour of blood mixed to water, disappearing down a plug hole, much like the meeting of our legs. Remember this. Our whole lives are a protest. Thank you. So when I wrote Butterfly Fist, I wanted to explore the bravest amongst lesbian women, but I also wanted to party. This is central to the writing of the piece. I wanted to recreate not only the trauma, but the way we released it across dance floors, in Hackney bars, out on the streets, in queer squats. I wanted to eulogize and to praise these extraordinary, badly behaved, wrong-walking women. Butterfly Fist is in some ways a love story. But it's also an opportunity for me to investigate global butch communities, to explore, for example, jackrolling, which you might know is what's been described as an epidemic of corrective rape against butch women in South Africa. To also look again to Chile and the red zone, where lots of young masculine butch women are being murdered. And of course, to also investigate the isolated attacks across the UK, the US, and across the whole of Europe. I wanted to follow my instinct to make the invisible visible and to take the silence and turn it into a symphony. You've just heard an example of some sections from the 15-minute piece, and it was successful. And because of that, and through the support of Apples and Snakes and the original crew, we are now developing into 1 hour, maybe 1 hour and 20-minute full show, which we aim to tour across the UK and internationally in 21 and 22. Along with the spoken word theatre piece, I'm also publishing it as a book called Conto, which is going to be released by Saki Press in June next year, which will kind of go in turn with go in the same time as the spoken word theatre show. So now I want to talk about you and how you write and how we as a community own our own narratives and why it's important. When we publish for and of ourselves, there is a sense of belonging, of revolution in that corner of the cafe or in your favourite chair. It's that sense of the self returning with gifts in her mouth. And in that moment, the book becomes a mirror. And reflected in that mirror is not only you as you really are, but a whole imagined community standing somewhere to the back of us, slightly to the left. As a teenager, books were maps for me, especially because I come from the post-industrial North, where I had no gay community in the early 1980s and was too afraid to walk into the only gay pub in town in case I became more gay or something like that. Instead of walking into bars, I walked into books. I found my closest friends there. I travelled to places an economically deprived, working class lesbian would not be able to visit. I learned of activists and squatters. I heard of Hackney, of Brixton, of a whole world of possibility. It was during my late teens when Section 28, a bill banning the promotion of positive stories and images around lesbian and gay people as a pretended family unit, came into law, brought in by the Tory government. But as always, Newton's third law applies to culture as much to physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We pushed back. The classic queer narrative is a coming out story, one that details the stages between self-realization, suppression, denial, oppression into the final freedom and often into the arms of another. In terms of lesbian literature, when it isn't pornographic or erotic pieces written by straight men, most of the stories The lesbian texts of the 20th and 21st century were more warnings than they were a reflection of a positive lifestyle. Those of you over the age of 40 will remember The Well of Loneliness, Women's Barracks, or books like Patience and Sarah. And so I prepared myself happily for a life of abject misery and fond rejection. But thanks both to Section 28 and in response to those earlier works, during the late 70s and 80s, women's writing with it lesbian literature exploded into new forms, thanks to a proliferation of independent queer press like the Gay Men's Press, Sheba, Naiad, Virago, the Women's Press, amongst many, many others. We were inundated with a range of lesbian characters, voices, and stories. Suddenly, lesbians weren't sobbing into their pillows anymore, but were striding across moors. We were becoming verbs. We were moving people, were actions rather than internal musings. Coming out stories, as a result, were overtaken by kind of more progressive scripts, stuff like sci-fi, vampire stories, feminist deconstructions of fairy stories and Greek myths. And it was these books in particular that formed the basis of the conversation with myself. So now I want to just kind of give you a little bit of a background about the kind of work that I've been reading over the time. And I'm really going to focus now on queer poetry. I am a poet and spoken word artist. Queer poetry, or lesbian poetry, lesbian gay, whatever kind of poetry you want to name it, has an incredible impact. This is because everything we say is magnified by live performance. In queer poetry, we identify with the poet rather than the character. The poet as character. As Hannah Gadsby said when asked why she doesn't write more explicitly gay material, I was on stage the entire time. And that's been my experience as a butch lesbian, dressing like I do, looking like I do. I have been into thousands of schools across this country and internationally, teaching them poetry and spoken word. And whilst not explicitly talking about a gay narrative, my presence there enables a gay narrative to be explored. I've been asked in the past why I don't write more explicitly for the LGBT plus community, with the interviewer noting that I'd written extensively about the lives of the underprivileged and marginalised. I've mentioned before that I come from the ends, a working class community, and that's formed quite a lot of the basis of my work. I was so surprised by this question anyway, that I reacted really defensively. And instead of being really honest and taking a moment, what I did instead was reel off all the things I'd done specifically for the LGBT community. Why didn't I just say that I was there the entire time? And when I'm telling a poem which is about gang members in tower blocks, or about girls in gangs, or any number of things, I was there the entire time. And frankly, how dare you judge the pronoun of the character? You just assumed I was talking about straight men. So for you, as a writer, I think it's really important to know why you're writing and what you're writing into. Is the narrative in your piece gossip shared between community members that few people on the outside will understand, or is it aimed at widening understanding across all societies? Does it mean to change anything? If so, how? In my view, change occurs when it becomes commonplace to have characters in literature crafted from multiple backgrounds. If you can't see yourself, write yourself. Write yourself into the film, the play, the poem, the novel. Think of real people when you write, not just issues. Remember throughout that your pen is a camera, yeah? And the poem is cinema. So take that pen into each scene so you can show us the colours in the story, the throw of light, the metaphor. Show, don't tell. Some telling is always useful, both in prose and poetry, especially in spoken word, but don't build your body of work on it. It's one of your tools, that's all. For me personally, I want narratives where the queerness of characters is both incidental and central. I want it all, just like every heterosexual white male writer does. I'm going to give you a couple of exercises now that you can use at home to try to explore your own writing. These are things that I use a lot in workshops. It's a little bit strange for me to do it in this environment. In case you're wondering, I'm sitting underneath my bed staring at the little green light. Thankfully, I have the lovely Max to check out in the corner. So before you start a writing exercise, give yourself a trigger warning. All poetry should trigger someone. It should. It's what it's about, unless you're getting it in a Hallmark card, a greetings card. So when you approach the page, do so with honesty, with integrity. Remember that your story is one of 1,000 intersecting stories. So ask yourself, what's it about, this story, this poem? Why does it need to be told? Will it tell itself? Or will I need to visit archives? Will I need to interview people, bring other people into it? Is it reportage? What revelations are in your narrative? So that's before you begin to get to the page. One of the exercises that I use quite a lot in workshops is the canto exercise. And in case you don't know what a canto is, a canto, very simplistically described, is lots of tiny poems around a central extended metaphor that when put together make a whole new poem. And a good example I often use is Dante's Inferno. So you can take poems out, you can put poems in. It's an IKEA poem, if you like. Sorry I didn't put that in the script, Max, but it's true. Cantos are IKEA. So when I'm trying to begin to think of the ways into a canto poem, I use this. If you can see that on the screen, it's essentially what's known as a storyboard in film. You'd have it this way round, and it's a way of deciding what scene goes in each box. The reason that I use this is because there's 6 boxes, and if you know anything about spoken word, once we get started, we do not stop. And one of the greatest criticisms of this art form is that, yes, we do go on. It's as though we spend 3 stanzas working up to the real verse and then a couple of stanzas winding down. So this is an exercise that is designed to help you really focus in on what you want to say, number 1. And number 2, to think really visually. And remember, I'm not asking you to write in the squares. Not asking you to draw in the squares. I'm asking you to write pictures. So think about yourself, or think about the thing you want to talk about. Perhaps it's like me and you want to talk about the experience of being a butch woman. You know, you have 6 boxes to tell that entire story, and that you're writing by hand, so the boxes don't expand, they stay the same size. So you know you've maybe got 6 lines for each stage. Identify them. Is it the story of becoming trans? Is it the story of a non-binary person? Is it the story of a lesbian or a gay man? What are the 6 scenes that sum that up for you? Is there a part of it only that you want to tell? I use it, like I said, to impress upon the fact that you show. Don't tell people things, show them it, because that is where the heart of change exists, when we feel, when we become empathetically connected with another person's story. You can try this many different ways, and just keep going through them. Keep going through them, remembering that the poem is cinema. Another exercise you can do, I think, is really important for all of us, whether we're new to the community or elders, is the praise poem. Praise poem is a classic form, and what it simply does is it looks at other people's work, other people within your community. Particularly, I think, important is your friendship group, because within our community, those friends are more than that. They are family. They're our world. There was a point in my life where I realized I didn't know anybody but lesbians, seriously. And it wasn't that I set out to be a lesbian separatist. It's just, your world brings you into contact with other worlds. And those were the only worlds that I met. So the praise poem, I think, is a really exciting form, because you just look at the ordinary people around you. Who is your family? Can you write a piece that celebrates their existence, that solidifies it within the world? And there is, like I said, a great tradition within particularly lesbian feminist literature of doing this. So explore that as a possibility. Another great thing you can do is, I'm going to give you a little bit of a reading later from some of the books, just a couple of snips of poems that have helped to kind of keep me going over the years. Have a look at the queer canon. Have a look at the LGBTQ plus canon of writers. Find a poem and respond to it. Again, this is a massive tradition, particularly within the written poetry community. You might have come across poems and suddenly they'll say after and then name a poet's name, Dennis Smith, for example. And they write a poem either in that form, the way they wrote it, but maybe changing the content slightly, or they'll write a response. So remember, community connection is at the heart of all of our art. It's the spark that creates the great work, and we are in constant conversation with one another. So you might pick up a book by Adrienne Rich, who's been dead some time, but find that you can continue something that she wrote. So that's another great thing you can do. Please remember, you're never alone when you've got these books, because you can constantly enter their worlds and speak to them directly. And the last little tip I've got is something that's becoming more and more important in recent years within the LGBTQ plus community, and that is commemorating our historic moments. So we are writing pieces which take us into these very important moments in history. Now, the very obvious one is the Stonewall Uprising. But I would ask you, if you're going to do the Stonewall Uprising as a creative piece, perhaps you could tell the story in a slightly different way. Maybe you want to tell the story of the butch bouncers that night who were on the bars. Or maybe it's something to do with the closeted gay policeman. Or maybe it's that first damn stone that was thrown. Was it a stone? Was it a shot glass? Let's face it, it's more likely to be that. Find a different way into the story which brings you somehow into that narrative. You might want to look at the most spectacular expounding of queer pride I think that's ever existed in this country, which is the Manchester Clause 28 March, which was back in the late 80s, and which I went on. I was very lucky to be there. Can you look into the history and find out what happened there? Because I'm telling you, that moment was extraordinary. Not one of us had walked down the streets being gay before. We just hadn't, and we took over the whole of Manchester. Find that scene. Do you know the story of the Pretty Police? Now that it's legal to be homosexual, perhaps we don't think about that anymore. But I grew up in a time when my gay brothers were being constantly arrested. When I was at school, my gay best friend went to Borstal, which is prison for young people, because he's gay, and went cottaging. Can you look into what the Pretty Police were? What's their importance? And then later on, in the early 90s, I think it was the case of Jennifer Saunders. And I don't mean the comedian. This was just a young dyke, a young masculine presenting lesbian who was taken to court by the family of her girlfriend for pretending to be a man and was sentenced to prison. Can you look at that story? Can you see what that sits within today's culture? Is there a new angle? There are so many of our stories that we have lost throughout time that I think it's really important that we do what we can as writers and artists and cultural makers to address all of that. So now what I wanted to do for my last piece is to take you through a really quick journey. Max may be able to do some signing for all of it, but please forgive them if they don't. I just landed this on them. So Songs My Enemy Taught Me is my own book, and obviously that's got queer narratives within it, as well as stories of women globally. But the book, which I always return to, and it's probably a terrible book, but it's the one, when you're a kid and you find this thing and you save up and you save up and you buy it, and it tells you who you are. And that book was by Judy Graham, a poet we don't hear of much these days. And the book was called Another Mother Tongue. And this looked at the cultural history of gay people throughout time. I think it was published in like 1984 or 1985. So it's a really old book, but it's a wonderful way of looking and browsing through your own history, finding out things like here, Boudica's electrifying names, finding out the stories of Boudica, finding out what the word spinster means around the world, finding out about the dildo and the devil, which I'll be returning to later because I've clearly forgotten about that. And these are great sources. If you're writing any kind of poetry or story, get some textbooks because their language will kind of inspire you. And I meant to give a tip earlier about using the language of the oppressors. It's a good thing to do. Go into those arrest sheets, those charge sheets from Stonewall. Go into those post-mortem reports for people who've been queer bashed. Use the language they're using as an access point, as a way into writing a new piece, because it can be very powerful. And if you go online, you can see a lot of work around the Human Rights Act that some of us have done, which uses the same language of the oppressor to approach the oppression. All right, so we did Judy Graham, and now we're on to Naming the Waves, which was a little bit of a revolution in my handbag. I think I probably stole this because I always did. It's contemporary lesbian poetry. And I'm going to read a very short bit from this by Judith Barrington. It's just called Homophobia. I believe this came out again in the late 80s. When I came out to her, she started calling me you people. That's the poem. And it's kind of something that's always stayed with me because why wouldn't it? As well as that, within this book is an incredible piece of work by Pat Parker, who's one of our legends. And I'm just going to read the first part of her poem here. The poem is called Woman Slaughter from Naming the Waves by Pat Parker. It doesn't hurt as much now. The thought of you dead doesn't rip my innards, leaves no holes to suck rage. Now, thoughts of the Thor daughters, of Buster Cox's children, survivors of Texas hell, survivors of soul-searing poverty, survivors of small-town mentality, survivors now 3, doesn't hurt as much now. 1. I used to be fearful of phone calls in the night, never in the day. Death, like the vampire, fears the sun, never in the day. Hello, Patty. Hey, big sister, what's happening? How's the kids? Patty Jonesy shot Shirley. She didn't make it. Hello, death. Don't you know it's daytime? The sun is much too bright today. Hello, death. So this is the beginning of an extraordinary piece of work which blows apart violence that's been perpetrated against lesbians throughout time. And then going back down, I'm going to skip a couple because we're running out of time. But I want to go, of course, to Adrienne Rich. Adrienne Rich was a lesbian feminist poet of a Jewish heritage who wrote some revolutionary material. She's born in 1929 and wrote numerous books, like a lot of different books. I fell into her aged about 18. I think I was probably in some bookshop stealing a book when I opened the page and I read this. It's very small and it's from her long sequence called 21 Love Poems. This is poem number 9. Your silence today is a pond where drowned things live. I want to see raised, dripping and brought into the sun. It's not my own face I see there, but other faces, even your face at another age. Whatever is lost there is needed by both of us. A watch of old gold, a water-blurred fever chart, a key. Even the silt and pebbles at the bottom deserve their glint of recognition. I fear this silence, this inarticulate life. I'm waiting for a wind that will gently open this sheeted water for once and show me what I can do for you, who have often made the unnameable nameable for others, even for me. That's Adrienne Rich. Moving on, I'm just going to show you some books before I end. You need to read Audre Lorde. If you want to understand lesbian LGBTQ writing, read Audre Lorde. You can see that her work is huge. She is basically the canon of queer literature, along with Adrienne Rich, and it's no surprise that they were lovers. On to some more contemporary works. This is stunning, Flesh by Mary Jean Chan. Highly recommended, not just in terms of representation of queer identities, but of intersectional identities, but just the writing is incredible. This beautiful, beautiful, intricate, elegant, passionate, angry, careful work is something I will always recommend. And this one as well, Soho by Richard Scott. If you haven't read this, you need to grab hold of a copy of it. It's a stunning evocation of gay life, particularly male gay life. And of course, it celebrates the whole area of Soho, our queer little sanctuary. There's also other authors like the American Danez Smith, whose new book, Homie, is pretty much what I was talking about, the praise poem earlier. It's a way of praising those nearest to you and elevating them importance in the world. But I wanted to end this particular session of reading with a brand new book that I only got yesterday. It's the new pamphlet by Lisa Lux. It's called Trust Your Outrage. And it's a little chapbook, which essentially it's a provocative little book, which aims to get us all back into writing and back on our feet. And I'll end this little talk from me and Max with the beginning of a poem that's simply called Lesbian. We've become homeless in language, kicked out of our own word, a community centre so hostile, we clumsy through umbrella terms, exposed, you never know. Which days your clothes will become fatigues, which days you'll bleed, bones moving out the way of fists like girls dodging tanks in the street. Thank you all so much for taking part of this. I think we're going to look at a few questions now. I'll have to put this on. So let's have a little look. So, audience question. If I want to start writing emotive poetry, is it important to align myself with a cause or movement? That seems to me a bit counterintuitive, my friend. It seems to me that the cause of the movement is what propels you. I think the most powerful thing is to write the self in truth, honesty, and integrity. So don't worry about representing a particular cause, but write yourself, because somehow you are probably a part of that. I hope that's helpful. Putting on the old girl glasses again. I can see the chat, Polly. Audience question 2. As a lesbian poet, do you think you've suffered more criticism than other poets? How do you deal with this, if so? All right. So, I'm 53 years old. I've been a spoken word artist since the age of 15. I was on the scene before there was a scene. In the old days was Benjamin Zephaniah, Linton Kwesi Johnson, Jules, and then us newcomers coming in. There weren't any gigs. In my view, yes, I've watched people elevated around me because I'm a funny looking woman and because my work approaches things that are difficult and challenging for people to approach, I guess. But I think a huge part of it is that sense of homophobia, without any doubt whatsoever. It certainly felt like that for me. Okay. So, question 3. Do you want each poem to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each poem? Now, that is a stunning question. For Butterfly Fist, the aim is to create a piece of work which celebrates that moment in time. And in case I haven't been clear, the moment in time I'm talking about is the mid-90s in London, and a part of this extraordinary scene, which I think doesn't exist anymore, but in a moment of time was this heart of revolution within the UK. So in that, all the work needs to be connected. However, within the book Conto, which is going to have Butterfly Fist, the play within it, I think each poem speaks to each other in a certain way, but in the same way that if you have a conversation with me on the street, I might well move tangentially in conversation very, very quickly. The same applies to writing. And I think most poets or writers would like their body of work to be seen as a whole, but perhaps that's not what happens. I would love it if people could see my earlier work around gangs and around tower blocks and estates as part of the narrative of queer people. That would be incredible, but here's hoping. The point is, you do what you need to do. Okay. Question. The trick to writer's block, if you have one. I've got a wicked trick to writer's block. So I'm assuming you've got lots of books. I've got a book here. It's not gay, I don't think, by Ishion Hutchinson, and it's called House of Lords and Commons. And what I do when I'm stuck is I open a book and I put my finger in, and it says here, the whole class scattered. That's all I take from the poem, and I write that down, and then I give myself 5 minutes and I don't stop. The whole class scattered. So around, it's called bibliomancy. You can go around your whole flat, pick books off, open books, choose a line at random and write into it. Block doesn't exist. It doesn't. You have page fright, the same as stage fright. And page fright exists because we're so
page fright. I love it.
We're so concerned about our words being
Fuck,
perfect.
I just came out. Fucking hell.
We're so concerned about our words being perfect and on point, we get afraid, and that is page fright. So the way to break it is you go into that dark room of the white page and write down what you can. Okay, let's get another question. I'm sorry I have to keep flitting on these big granny glasses. Right. What would you like your legacy to be, or what main message would you like your work to leave behind? Raw. I want to be a poet. I really want to be a poet. I want to be a writer. I want you to approach my work as a human being. I want to write extensively from my experience of being from a marginalized community, but I want that work to be open to all to connect with and to read. I think some success has been achieved for gay male writers in that extent, but not the more kind of the butcher ones amongst us, those funny looking women. So that's what I'd like the legacy to be. I'd like a legacy of empathy and connection and hope. And I think that's what all writers really, really want. Okay, so the last question, best memory or pilgrimage you've gone on as inspiration for your work. Do you know what? I'm really lucky. So for the last 25 years, I've literally minced around the UK and the world meeting extraordinary people. When I did 2 Australian tours last year, and on the second one, I ended up in this workshop for songs my enemy taught me, and it was filled with butch women, but over the age of 70. It was such a surprise to me. And they walked in, and I can't tell you what the feeling was like. They have such silence around them, and integrity and honor and tenderness. So that was a really important moment for me. Obviously, I just kind of gibbered a little bit and wasn't very useful, but to be reminded of our elders is important. Just before lockdown happened, I had a wonderful experience. Radio 4 had followed me in the making of Butterfly Fest, and they came along to a live performance of the poem I badly read earlier on, for the full version. And I got, it was on at Heaven nightclub, which for most of us in the queer community is an iconic night. And the last time I was there, I was gurning in my 20s. So actually to be there, to perform to my own community, a fairly risky piece about lesbian butch identity, and then to get a standing ovation was the best moment of my cultural life thus far. It was an amazing moment. So guys, I think we're coming towards the end now. We've got 4 minutes left. And so in that time, I would just like to thank you for coming to join us. I would also very much like to thank Amnesty International for organising this gig, for the whole Pride Inside crew. And of course, if we can have a full standing ovation for my good friend here, Max, who's very valiantly been sign languaging my deviations from the script. And I'm extremely grateful to you, Max. Thank you. Following on from this, I think it would be a good thing for you to click onto Amnesty International website and look at the campaigns they're supporting, particularly to support Action for Lgbtiqa, who's a Polish LGBTQ plus woman who's experienced an abuse. And if you can get involved in that campaign and in any of the other Amnesty campaigns, remember they are the voice for all of us, the voice for the misrepresented. Thank you so much. Yeah, the scripts are available online. Thank you. Bye-bye.